I remember when I was a kid growing up in rural Appalachia that on Good Friday from noon until 3, everything stopped. Even the post office closed from noon to 3 on Good Friday. Everything stopped. And people sat at home in perfect silence for 3 hours. And it didn't matter what church you went to. We all did it. It was what everyone was expected to do. Remember how silent the world was the day after 9/11? Do you remember how silent it was? It was so silent because we couldn't absorb the deaths of so many people. But really, I think what we couldn't absorb was the death of a dream. That's just how silent it was from noon to 3 o'clock every Good Friday when I was a kid. Because a dream had died. His disciples expected so much. They hoped for so much. They wanted so much. And then it was over. Jesus had lost. Last night, we heard the part of John's story that comes just before the part we heard just now. The losing had already begun. Jesus washed his disciples' feet. It was humiliating. That's how Peter saw it, at least. That's how Peter saw it. It was humiliating. And it seems that Jesus even washed the feet of the one who was about to rat him out to the government thugs. And Peter saw how humiliated Jesus was. And he could not stomach it. Jesus was losing before his eyes. But that's not how John saw it. John, the author of this gospel, maybe John the Divine, our John the Divine, that's not how he saw it at all. Did you hear what John had Jesus say at the end of the passage we heard last night? Did you hear what John had Jesus say? Now, the Son of Man has been glorified. That's what Jesus said. When Peter looked down on that man on the floor, that man on his knees, kneeling like a slave in front of his students, washing their filthy feet, Peter saw humiliation. But when John saw it, when John saw all of this, he saw glory. Peter was repelled, but John was awestruck. John gazed in wonder. Now, as the man knelt on his knees to wash his disciples' feet, now the Son of Man has been glorified. On his knees, washing feet, loving his betrayer. Now, the Son of Man has been glorified. And what do we see? What do we see when we look down at the man on his knees? Water and basin and towel. And what do we see when we look up at the man hanging on the cross? Nails and lance and crown of thorns. Do we, with Peter, look in disgust and run? Or with John, do we gaze in wonder? And do we reach out toward him, hoping just to touch, even for a second, such beautiful glory? Do we draw near, as John did that day, to the cross and embrace those knees that knelt before the disciples? And those knees now torn from fall after fall after fall. Do we embrace them not in disgust or even in grief, but in wonder? And they went to the Kidron Valley. And the thugs came. But they did not snatch Jesus like ICE snatches university students. They did not overtake Jesus. Jesus overtook them. And they were overwhelmed by his glory, and they fell to the ground. And that is how John, our beloved John the Divine, that is how John saw it all, this entire Passion Day. He saw Jesus glorious before the priests and glorious before Pilate, glorious in shouldering the burden of his cross, not with a helper, but all alone, glorious and strong, and glorious in hanging on that cross even unto death. All John saw was glory. But the rest of them in this story, the priests and Pilate and Peter and those fools who begged to have the insurrectionist liberated so he could just murder and murder again. Those fools. Who are the real losers in this story? And I don't mean loser as a slur. I just mean it as a description of reality. So much was possible. But they lost it all. They lost it all because they could not see true life, risen life, glorious, glorious life. They could not see it right before their eyes. And so they chose death. Over and over they chose death. Because they thought that power was life. They thought that conquest was life. They thought that safety was life. That venting all of their rage on an innocent scapegoat, they thought all of that was life, but it was just death. They were all dead because the God they worshipped was death. But Jesus was life, fully alive, gloriously alive. Jesus was pure glory. John, of course, soon in the story, will tell us about the empty tomb. John will soon tell us about Mary thinking that the risen one was the gardener. John will soon tell us of Thomas using his own fingers to probe into the glorious wounds. But you know what? Not much would be lost if John told us none of that. Not much really would be lost. Because last night, and now today, John already is telling us that Jesus was not some crushed loser. Jesus was not crushed by the evil games this world plays. Jesus was alive in glory. Alive in glory, long before we tried in vain to crush him with our evil games, our death dealing. He was alive. But we are crushed. We are crushed by these evil games we play. What fools we are. if we think that the evil games of this current age will ever make us great again. Most of the people who are observing the silence of this day, or my people when I was young observing the silence of this day, they think it'll pass. It's a bad patch. But then Easter will come. Then Easter will come. They're optimistic. But Christianity is not an optimistic religion. Christianity, in fact, is a rather pessimistic religion. Because Christianity claims that we will never get better at any of this. Not really. We won't. A few weeks ago, those of you who are Episcopalians heard the collect, the opening prayer at the Eucharist. We have no power in ourselves to help ourselves. We have no power in ourselves to help ourselves, the collect said, and it is true. And so God, in God's infinite love for us, God humbled God's very self and allowed us to do what we always do. We cannot help it, we cannot help doing it, and we will never be able to help ourselves from doing it, and we cannot stop ourselves even today. To Peter those days, and to the world around them that day, those days, and even to the world today, it may have seemed that Jesus was humiliated and defeated, that Jesus lost, but not John. What John saw was truth. John, through this whole story, saw God's glory standing firm and risen, always risen, always risen. God's risen life in the midst of our madness. And love won. Not eventually, not 3 days from now, not after the tomb. Love won, even on the cross. Let the whole earth see and know that things which were cast down are being raised up, and things that had grown old are being made new, and that all things are being brought to their perfection by Him, through whom all things were made.